the understanding. It's the effort involved. You're getting as far as you can get.
So the takeaway was more that, this is where he's going, that you have to have both the makif and the pnimi together. That's the real takeaway. That you can't have one without the other. It doesn't work. Okay. So now he goes into a new topic, seemingly. Page 2, right? Second column on the left. On the left.
You did that both, right?
Yeah. ובהקדמה זו, I told you we'd skip a little. ובהקדמה זו יובן עניין עליות העולמות 50,000 יובלות. So now that we understand this need, the connection between the line, the ray of light that comes down, and the circles that come out of it, meaning the makif, the surrounding light that comes out of it, and the relationship between them, and that you can't have one without the other. So we can take this and apply it to another topic that seems to be a very esoteric topic in the Medrash in Kabbalah, which is the elevation or the ascent, rather, not the elevation, the ascent of the worlds up to 50,000 jubilees. And that's the language that the sages used.
50,000 jubilees is forever, basically.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's not a time span. It's a symbolic time span. It's not never ending. It's not without end. You have to understand what they want by 50. Why do they mention the word 50? Why do they mention the word thousands? And why did they mention jubilees? Okay. So we're not going to take it 50 years anyway. So you already had 50. So why do you need 50 times 50? 2,500. Well, what's that for?
Because it's 50 squared.
I understand. Why is that? Why is that interesting to them? Anyway, we're not going to take it apart now. We're just going to say that whenever they talked about the ascent of the worlds, that's the number that they used, 50,000 jubilees. Okay, and there's many things that they explain happen after 50,000 jubilees. Now, right away with the 50, you understand that we're talking about bina. We're talking about understanding.
Right.
Because Bina is 50 gates of understanding, 50 gates of Bina. So we're talking about, as he'll explain in a moment, we're talking about the human mind comprehending things. Meaning, what they're describing here, that's why it's not without end, is the linear progression of human comprehension. And there's a certain comprehension that mind.
It's not exponential.
No, it's not exponential. You're not skipping. It's linear. It's
the more you know, you're building up the more that you know.
So, okay, you could say that the amount of knowledge is exponential, but the amount of development that's going on is linear. And it's like saying that. No, anyway. I don't want to get into it. So this all happens, he says, وَأَكُلْ بَأَوْغَ پْنِمِي. This all has to do with what's integrated into our minds. And this is not some kind of, that's why it's not a skip. You're not skipping. You're slowly building. That's what we mean by, that we're standing on the shoulders of giants, or whatever you want to call it. There it's talking about knowledge. Here we're talking about comprehension of God. Comprehension of what it means to be alive. Okay? Why did they not understand Chassidus? Why did they not talk about Chassidus 1,000 years ago? Okay? Because what? Okay, so why didn't they learn already Chassidus from the beginning? Why this slow development? There's a slow development.
Because the people became less aware, so therefore they needed something else, needed another step down.
No, that we already discussed. Chassidus doesn't see it that way. Not at all that way. In fact, it's the opposite. We talked about that 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, when we explained the descent of the generations. According to Chassidus, which doesn't mean the descent of the generations, it means that you should be more and more lowly in the way you see yourself. But on the contrary, we know a lot more than anybody knew 1,000 years ago. There's no question we know more. We're less smart, maybe, but we know a lot more. Okay.
It's not from our own efforts, it's what we've taken from others.
Said no. But that's the linear progression. That's the progression of knowledge in the world. and again, I don't just mean knowledge. I mean comprehension of what it means to be alive, to serve God. All these things are better understood now. And he calls it that all this is ha'or pnimi. This is all the inner light, meaning what was integrated into what we truly understand. And this all happens because the vessels are ready to contain something higher. They're able to hold on to something more difficult. So the vessels have become more and more refined. And the vessels are... Okay. So in any case, כמו גן עדן התחתון, מבחינת כלי לגילוי אור וזיו מאין סוף ברוך הוא. וגן עדן העליון הוא כלי לגילוי אור ותענוג גדול, ונעלה יותר לאין שיעור על האור שבגן עדן התחתון. So, just as you say that the lower Garden of Eden, again in the Zohar there's infinite levels, as it were, of Garden of Eden, meaning every time you comprehend something godly, that's called having a experience of the Garden of Eden.
There's millions of people all in different places, or everybody has his own private Gan Eden?
First of all, it's what you said. That people inhabit the spectrum of all the levels of Gan Eden, meaning souls, there are different souls at different stages of development. The other point is that every person himself goes through stages of what he can understand. So in the Zohar it's called the lower Gan Eden, higher Gan Eden. Again, it's how much you comprehend godliness. How much you comprehend godliness in your life. That's not true. See, you keep doing that, but that's not...
The truth is.
So every time you ascend, it's true that even the lowest level of Gan Eden is some comprehension of God's infinite nature. But there's many, many levels after that. And each time it's another revelation of God's infinite nature.
Gan Eden that you get depends on many things. Also depends on the mitzvahs you do.
Uh-huh.
So, what's the connection between all of a person who spent his whole life doing mitzvahs, but he didn't learn too much? So why should he go to a Gan Eden where there's a higher understanding? Because you didn't get an understanding of Hashem from doing mitzvahs.
Yeah, when we say understanding, we don't just mean 1 plus 1 equals 2. We say understanding is that you can comprehend something. For instance, if I tell a child, we've used this example before. If I tell a child, this is really good wine, they try to drink it. What do they expect? Something sweet, and then they drink it. It's sour. It's how could you call this good? Because they don't have the vessel for it. They just don't have the vessel. Is not yet refined. So in the same way, the pleasure that you get out of godliness requires you to have a refined vessel. Yeah. In the same way that a child can't understand wine, a person who hasn't learned or hasn't done mitzvos can't comprehend, cannot appreciate what it means to have divine nachas. So even, it's a very strange thing. I was just reading this book my wife gave me. Once in a while she gets her reading crazes. She was young, she used to read without end. What did she read? She read the classics. That's what she read. When I was young, I guess I also read some classics, because I went to public school and I went to university, and I read all kinds of things. The Odyssey I never read. I never connected to that style. I hated it. But other things, and so the last 2 weeks she gave me this book called Stoner to read. It's by an author I had never heard of, John Williams, which was very, very surprising to me, because I thought I knew the more important American authors. He's American, and he passed away in 1995. So I was surprised that it didn't show up on my radar all the years I was in school. But it's a classic novel now. It's like it's become very, very well, very popular. It's written tremendously well. Maybe the best written book I've ever read in prose. I mean, really at a level that, he doesn't, there's these authors like Umberto Eco who will throw more words that you don't know in one sentence than most books have in an entire chapter. Okay? But he's like, he's nuts. You can't read him. But he's interesting. But it's like it's work to read. This thing just flows. It's beautifully written. The cadence is perfect. It's the story of a guy who grew up was born in 90 or something like that, and grew up in Missouri, and eventually ended up becoming an English professor at the University of Missouri or something like that. And so it tells the story of his life. Obviously, towards the end, it gets cut short. He didn't have patience to drag in another year, and really nothing supposedly happens. The most disturbing thing was, to me, that he didn't know what to get pleasure out of from life. He didn't know. I'm not talking about that he didn't know how to go buy good wine, or he didn't know how to go to the right hotel in New York, or he didn't know which hotel to go to in Aruba. I'm not talking about that at all. He has a daughter. He has one daughter, and he has a grandson. And he can describe, this author, which obviously, reflects on the author more than reflects on this imaginary, fictitious character. You can say that he saw him once or twice, and he didn't really. So that he would have liked to see him more, but didn't care. What? His daughter lives far away from him. She becomes an alcoholic. The little kid grows up with the other side of the parents of the father. Nothing. How could you not understand the pleasure that a person gets from having, that one pasuk in Tehillim, Banecha keshtilei zeitim saviv leshulchanecha. That your offspring are like olive trees around your table. How could a person? It's not that he didn't have a child. It's not a person doesn't have a child. What can he do? He never got to drink the wine. But you have it. It's not even that far away. Like, how could you not understand the pleasure, the whole meaning of life is there. You work for 60 years to get there. And this guy's like, he doesn't care. He doesn't see it. And you think about the goyim, they don't see it, most of them. They don't understand what we're talking about. So like my wife always says, we have a lot of friends now in Mea Shearim for whatever reason. So we go there from time to time. And my wife always says, I don't know who has Olam Haba. I don't know who has a portion in the world to come. But I know that they have this world. You know how they live. You live pretty much like that. But because of the Rebbe, your kids are scattered all over the globe. But you know how they live.
Everybody in the same room.
Maybe it's not on the same room. It's not the same standard that was 60 years ago. But everybody's in the same neighborhood. Or maximum they're in Ashdod, maximum they're somewhere else. And whenever there's a simcha, Shabbos, Afruf, whatever it is, everybody comes, and they all find places to be. And if you got 60, 70 people, just direct descendants around your table, and you spend a Shabbos like that, and Baruch Hashem today they don't, the women don't have to cook and clean for the whole thing, they have it catered, so there's levels of catering in the world already, and you can get people help, whatever. Not to understand the nachas that you get from something like that. That's like it's trying to explain to a child why a good wine is a good wine.
Well, the Rebbe has a sikha about that. I told you the sikha, no?
Why this is also nachas, I understand. I'm not saying that it's not. It's a different type.
The Rebbe writes about the different types of nachas. Because it's only the human beings which have a connection with their grandchildren.
Right.
And they're one of the few people who have connection with their children.
Right.
So the connection
One of the few species.
Yeah. So the connection with the grandchildren comes about through the love of the child. So if you don't love the child, then you don't have any connection with the grandchild either.
Maybe that's it. I don't know what the reason, but it's like explaining this to somebody who doesn't get it is like trying to explain wine to a child. You can't explain it. So he says this is what Gan Eden means. Okay, so when you sit in Shalosh Shittis with a shtickle of herring, or you don't sit with anything, or Baruch Hashem in our shul, they started bringing some tuna. Okay, Baruch Hashem. They're becoming normal people again.
Big time.
They're becoming normal people. This whole thing of not eating a shalshidus is like, so I'm not saying you should eat a meal, but I'm not saying you should need to wash, but you need to eat something. You have to have something, otherwise you don't get it. And then we sing we sing for 45 minutes, Seder Nigunim. You're in Gan Eden, where are you? There's nothing you need to do in the world. You don't even have to learn. You just have to sit there and sing. And with people you like or you don't like, it doesn't even matter, because when you sing, nobody cares. Okay? And how can you explain this? When the most pleasure you have from the world is sitting and watching a football game. I'm not saying it's not pleasure, but that's like drinking, grape juice. What are you talking about? You don't even understand what pleasure is. Relatively speaking, it's some kind of pleasure, this football game, but come on, you don't get it. So that's what he's saying, that this develops, and it takes time to develop. It takes time even for the person himself. All the more so that we're talking about the larger process of understanding why there's pleasure in godliness. But that takes many generations. So he gives an example. What is this ascent of worlds like? פירוש, שהגן עדן שהוא עתה אצלנו קבלת שכר על המצוות, היה אז אצל אדם ראשון מבחינת מקום העבודה. כמו שאצלנו עתה העולם הזה. So he says, when man was first created, what did Hashem give him? He gave him straight away the end. He says that where he worked is what we call Gan Eden. Can you imagine that? I don't know if you feel this way. Did you ever feel at work that when you went to work, you're in Gan Eden?
No, never.
When I work, I feel like I'm in Gan Eden.
When you're working, because you've been working with Jewish things.
Right.
When I was at work and I was helping Jews, when I was helping
then you felt it.
Using my protection, then I felt, Mamish, when the Kodesh Baruch Hu has put me here for a purpose. And the pharmacist used to say it all the time. Hashem sent you here to teach us Torah. They weren't free from people, to teach us Torah.
Right.
And that's what you're here for. And I wanted to be the Menahel Agafal to go to Yerushalayim. He said, we don't let you leave. We need you here. We need you to help.
So what people
when
don't...
I left,
Yeah, sorry.
the tune changed a lot.
Right.
The love was temporary.
Because you only had the protector. So, for instance, the Rebbe who built the Shluchus, what did he do? He gave Gan Eden to people. People don't realize. He made your work Gan Eden. Somebody who works in Torah lives in Gan Eden. That's where I live. I don't know about the regular world. Now that I have to work in some startup. So, there's no money in Gan Eden, that we know. So you have to live poorly. But it's not that you can't make a living anymore. It used to be that if you wanted to live off of Torah, you were royally poor. I mean, but then
you got nothing.
Nothing.
You got nothing, if anything.
And now, I'm not saying that everybody's able to, but even just the shluchus thing, that you can live from Yiddishkeit. That's Gan Eden. So that's where Adam Arishon was. So there are people now living at Adam Arishon's level. Okay? We've gone back to that. Imagine how many generations could Avram have lived from Yiddishkeit? No. He had to work hard. Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe Rabbeinu, even for many, many generations until the Second Temple, you couldn't live from Yiddishkeit. The only ones who sort of had something, but again, it was a welfare system, were the Kohanim. They had something. But now you mamish have normal people whose career is Yiddishkeit. And I'm not talking about somebody who uses kardom lachfoba, somebody who uses it to make a career. I'm saying somebody whose work, honest to goodness, what he does every day is he deals with Torah. He deals with teaching people Torah. כמו שאצלנו אתה העולם הזה וקבלת השכר למעלה מגן עדן. ולא היה גן עדן אצלו נחשב לבחינת קבלת שכר, כי אם היה אצלו בחינת מרור, או מדור, כמו אתה אצלנו העולם הזה. Sorry, not מדור, מרור.
So we're in the.
So we've gone back to Gan Eden. I mean, at least some of us have gone back to Gan Eden the way it was when Adam Rishon was created. Again, why is it called that he was living in Gan Eden? He had to work. It says, though, David Shemwa. Hashem put him there to work. He worked all day long. But what he called work is what we call Gan Eden. It's getting the sachar. It's receiving the reward. Let's skip a little. V'zeu hakol gilui, and so it descends. The world descends back to this state. V'zeu hakol gilui. I'm going to the last paragraph here. V'zeu hakol gilui. זה הכל גילוי אורות פנימיים והכלים שהתגלה יותר עד אין קץ 50,000 יבלות, אבל לגבי, all this is in the inner light, the light that's like this, that descends, it extends down like a line. אבל לגבי האור מקיף שלמעלה מהקו, המקיף מראש עק עד רגלי עשייה בשווה, שם אין שינוי כלל. As we've said all the time, that in the Sovev, in the light that surrounds the world, there is no change. The world is always the same. Right?
So you don't influence the servant at all when you run?
No. It's always the same. The Sovev is just there to be appreciated. It's for you to connect to it through your consciousness, your super consciousness. That's why it's in the Keter. It's not the world of change. It's not this tree growing. It's not us talking. It's none of these things. It's the substrate that's everywhere, the background radiation that's everywhere, and that's pure divinity all the time. There, it never changes. שם אין שינוי כלל שהרי מקיף לאצילות. ועשייה בהשוואה אחת. Because it extends from the highest world to the lowest world equally. It's always the same everywhere. And then we get what we know, ולכן אמרו זה לפי שעה אחת בתשובה מעשים טובים בעולם הזה מכל חיי העולם הבא. So we said that's why mitzvos, which come from the Sovev, they don't change. They're always the same. Why doesn't somebody say, let's make a lulav out of something more practical today?
I need that. Huh? I need 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Hi, Mordechai. If you're still there. We're taking a 30-second break. Okay? So therefore we say that 1 hour of tshuva and good deeds in this world is greater than all the world to come. Why? Because the mitzvahs and tshuva, they come from the Sovev.
We never really talked about tshuva. Tshuva is what? We didn't talk about it. We talked about doing good deeds and we talked about learning. What's tshuva? It's good deeds? Or it's something else? Or
Tshuva is before the world. It's a makif.
When I do tshuva, right? I punch you on the nose, then afterwards I say sorry to you and sorry to Hashem. Well, where am I? I'm in the world of Nasi Taken, I'm in the world of Limit Torah, I'm in a different world.
Tshuva says that in spite of everything that's happened, I haven't changed.
In spite of everything I haven't changed. thought the idea of tshuva was to improve.
No, to return to your source.
Stronger bone. You took the rope and you snapped it.
That you're talking about.
And you make a double knot.
That you're talking about the revealed aspect, the thing that you need. But that's not the tshuva itself. The tshuva itself is that you can always go back to the source. You can always go back to how you are, how you really are.
So when David say my sin is everything.
That's the charata. To have lowliness.
So you did tshuva.
You gain lowliness from it. But the tshuva is not the feeling of lowliness. The tshuva is the feeling that nothing has changed. Hashem wants me just as much as He always wanted me. Hashem is still with me the way He always was. Okay. So we're going to skip a little because we've learned all of these. He's just repeating things that we've seen. Uvinyan, so going to the second paragraph from the bottom. ובעניין 50,000 יובלות יש לומר שזהו מה שכתוב ושם אחיו יובל. Now we add something new. He says that, remember in Bereshis there was a talk about the different children of Cain. So Cain had a son, his name was Yuval. No, just Yuval. ולכן היה אבי כל תופס כינור. So Yuval, we said 50,000 יובלות. What's the first time that the word Jubilee appears? So it appears in the name of this son of Cain. It was called Jubilee, Yuval. Really, it doesn't mean Jubilee there. It means like a part of a river. What do you call it? A part that goes off from the main river. But in any case, you get the image of a line, right? A Yuval is like a stream, so it's a straight thing. It's not a collection of water. If it was a collection of water, that would be like the roundness of the surrounding light. So he had a son, his name was Yuval. And it says the name of his brother was Yuval. The name of whose brother? The name of Yaval. There were two kids. One was named Yaval and one was called Yuval. So Yaval was the elder apparently. And Yuval was his younger brother. So he says he was called his younger brother, he was called his brother, and he was the master, the head of all those who play instruments. In this case, a lyre, kino.
I always thought it was metal instruments.
No, this is a string instrument.
So it's flute.
No, flute is something else. So all this is the ascent, meaning Yuval, the Jubilee, the same word, represents ascents, linear ascents. I guess I use the word linear mostly because it's a straight line. Not because it could be that in the line it is exponential,
Well,
like you said.
music is linear ascent because you go down, when you go, it's going up one.
Yeah, but you could say you skip because there's half tones, and you know that, especially in Israel now, they can't stand the 7-tone octave, right? There's really 12 because you have major and minor. So there's really 12, and they don't use it anymore. They only want the 16-tone and the 24-tone. Because that's the Oriental music. Okay? So in Israel, you can't play the 12-tone anymore. Yeah, you're considered obsolete if you do. You have to know how to play 16-tone. Anyway, so he was the master of all those who played instruments. Why? Because he says all the ascents are with instruments. It's very interesting. The music is what causes all the ascents. Now, if you understand. Now you understand why we're talking about pleasure. Okay. We're not talking about comprehension in the sense of just understanding how to make wine. We're talking about tasting and comprehending the good pleasure in making good wine. Okay. So that's what's really being taught. The ascent here is the ascent in understanding and in appreciating godliness in the world. And that comes through music. Same way the music is an appreciation. It's a pleasure.
The taste of whiskey changes depending on where you drink it and who you
Of course.
drink it with. No joke. Right?
Of course.
So sitting in for bringing
Yeah,
singing
it's
that,
different.
completely different
Right,
taste.
right. I started having whiskey again, Baruch Hashem.
Okay.
And this Shabbos we had Black Label.
Okay.
Not that Black Label is not like.
Black label's quite nice. Nothing wrong with that.
It's 1 over red label, no?
Yeah, but it's different ballgame.
So green label's better.
No, green label is something else. Green label is.
It's not single malt?
It's pure.
Okay, whatever.
Different taste.
Anyway,
Different
I hadn't had black label in a long time. But somehow it tasted completely different than could be because for a year and a half I haven't had.
Right.
Or whatever. But suddenly it has, and it could be that I'm over 50 now.
There's no it could be you are.
Yeah. Maybe I'm over.
Sign that you didn't get Misa based.
Right. Not yet. They may be putting me on hold
No,
because they're so busy with so many other people. I said, we'll see.
To make a party.
No, it's a 60.
Okay.
וזהו עניין. מאמר רז"ל יובל שמו. So all this is the inner light that you ascend in. And you ascend like you ascend in music. Like music causes the ascent. אכן, על גילוי בחינת המקיף נאמר יבל הוא היה אבי יושב אוהל. But beyond that, there is his brother, his older brother, whose name was Yaval. He represents the surrounding light. And he's his older brother. ונקרא אור פנימי אחיו לאור המקיף, שהרי מהמקיף הגדול נמשך האור פנימי. So now when you do this line that descends, line of infinite light, meaning the line of God's revelation in the world, that's continually descending. So one way of picturing it is that it descends and then a circle comes out. But immediately when it finishes the circle, it descends again. So who's the chicken and who's the egg? There's both ways you can look at it. You can say that the line is causing the circles, or the circles are causing... but it's not so simple, because the first thing that it came out of is a circle. So even before the line began to extend, it came out of a circle. But then, the Arizal and in Chassidus, it switched again, because they tell you it's not really connected to the circle. It has to make a leap. And only then does the line start. Meaning from the big circle, there's a leap. Anyway, it goes back and forth, and there's a lot of discussion about in Chassidus about who's first. But here he says simply, they're brothers. They both depend one on the other. Okay? It's true that one is the older brother. The surrounding light is more the older brother than the descending light, the light that comes down, that comes to integrate into the world. But still, they're related to one another. And it's like they cling to one another. You can't have one without the other. Now we're getting into Korach. Why are we getting into Korach? Because he just mentioned music. What was Korach? He was a musician. He's a Levi. He's a musician. So the Levim understand a lot about the descending light. They have less understanding about the light that surrounds all worlds. So it's very interesting that the pleasure that they give is not from the surrounding light. There's no change there. They create the pleasure. They're the musicians. That's avoda. You have to work. You have to do something. Like you said, you have to work. So they work in Gan Eden. It's very nice for them because they sit and they stand over the congregation and they sing and they this and they that.
Did they get rid from the korbanos?
What?
Why did the Kohen get from the korbanos? Right?
Depending which ones. If it's a shlamim, so it's
The
as a levim, no, the levim don't touch it. So now he's going to give the famous example that we've seen many, many times, which this will end. That in the human body, there's a representation of the entire body in the mind somehow. We don't know how that works. Okay? But we all have a representation of all of ourselves in the mind. That's another way of saying it. So maybe. And whenever you want to move a limb, you don't go like, I need to communicate with my hand. Open the channels.
Unless a person's been sick.
Wait, it said that. But in the we'll get to that in a second. So you don't say, okay, open the communication channels. Right. Open up and say, okay, let me move it.
It's unautomatic.
Really what he says is, you move it in your head. In your head, it's instantaneous.
The head gives out the instructions.
In your head, it already happened. Mm-hmm. Meaning, it's like when you grow older and your body stops functioning the way you were used to. Okay, never happened to anybody, but
never knows.
Okay. Never happened to us, but we've known people that it's happened to, right? what's the biggest shock to the mind?
Even older, it's not carrying
It's
out.
it's not doing what I told it to do.
Yeah.
In the mind, nothing changed. Understand? The picture of the body and the mind doesn't really change. You always feel young and healthy inside. You always expect that. Even when you got used to the fact that it doesn't work anymore, there's still a feeling of, what happened? Why is this not the way it used to be? And it's not just because you're used to it, because you get used to the new situation also. But there's like an expectation. In the mind, everything is the way it was. Nothing ever really changes.
In the people who are sat there locked and can't move, Chas v'shalom, after a stroke or whatever it is, and they don't respond, and you don't know it. Is something still going on in their mind?
Stroke is more, but talk about somebody who's a quadriplegic. Somebody who's even worse, is in a coma. In your dream, you see that the mind thinks that you still have a body and everything's the same. It's all the same. Why can't you remember? You know how in the dream sometimes you can't run fast enough. You ever get that? You're trying to escape somewhere and suddenly you don't move. You can't move. The mind thinks that that's normal, that you should be able to run as fast as you want. But suddenly somehow it's like there's nobody to talk to. It doesn't work. What he's saying again is, in the mind there's a surrounding light. The surrounding light sees everything equally from top to bottom, and it's always the same. It never changes. This is as close an experience to surrounding light as you can get. Right? So people who are able to sit and meditate for a long time on their bodies, right? And connect it. Like we say that every Shabbos. Kol atzmotai tomarna Hashem mikomocha. Who sits down and actually says that? Right? When you say Nishmat Kol Chai, do we actually go through imagining how every single limb says Hashem mikamocha? Hashem was like, if you don't, then you don't know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay? But the more you have this consciousness that my whole body is a vessel for expressing Hashem's greatness, then you understand that everything exists in the mind. There's a picture of everything in the mind. It's there. When you come to actually do things, that's a different story. It doesn't move as fast as you'd like it to. It doesn't do exactly the way you'd like it to. The same thing happens when people are playing video games, right? So in video games, whatever that is, they build on the mind's need to have perfection. What you're trying to do all the time is you're trying to meet your expectation in your mind, how the video game should work, how your character, how your avatar should work, with your ability, with your hands or something else to control it. But in your mind, it's perfect. The same thing when I started playing in America, I guess I felt it. I didn't feel it so much in Israel. I don't know why. Maybe it's a stage of development. When I was 13, I started playing football in America, soccer as they call it. Then I began to have dreams like that.
Ooh,
That in the dream, you see yourself dribbling and getting to the goal and putting in the ball in the net perfectly. Yeah, because the mind can see that. That's the makif. That's the surrounding light. And it's all pashut. It's all very easy. There's no effort involved. But then you come down into the regular world, and in the regular world, it takes time. It takes time for the feet to learn how to dribble properly. It takes time for you to learn how to have enough stamina, and so on and so forth. So that all is the difference. One of the most important metaphors that he brings constantly for explaining the difference between makif and sovev, between the surrounding light and the light that fills our world. And as I was learning this, I thought there's a phrase in Tehillim that you say, Bari Ulam. Bari Ulam means perfectly healthy. Bari Ulam. Ulam is Aleph Vav Lamed Mem, like a chamber. So really it comes from the word we saw it, Elim. Elim means power. So it's like powerful health. But you could also think about it as a chamber. That the true health is the one that's surrounding, like a chamber. It surrounds you. It's not something that you have to go and do this and do that. And if you have to start moving things, you're not perfectly healthy anymore. It means you have to start working on fixing things. Okay, so that's the end of his first chapter. So we learned some things about Memala and Sovev, about the light that fills our world and light that surrounds all worlds. And we hinted already at the fact that Korach belongs to those who understand only the light that fills all worlds. And he sees the essence. And he's not appreciative of the need for the makif. He doesn't understand what the makif gives you. And we'll see in the next chapter that what the makif gives you is the ability to sweeten the judgments of the ascent. The makif is chokhmah, he'll explain. And this will be a chiddush, because in the Arizal, the makif is not chokhmah. Okay? But that's another topic.
What is Beit Sasayan?
Sorry?